Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're watching from. I'm Nasanka, and I help parents who co-parent with narcissistic partners or ex-partners. I've got a special guest for my YouTube channel today. I really wanted to invite Beth Cox when I heard about what she's doing because what she does is really, really relevant to most of us on a daily basis. It is pain management. I will let Beth introduce herself, but Beth help people manage chronic pain, and but particularly people who are you looking for alternative ways, or they have tried all the pain medication, they have tried the NHS route, or well, any other GP Western medication route, and it hasn't really given the results. Like I know from my own experience, I've got this chronic shoulder pain on the left shoulder. I went through a lot of tests. I've been through surgery. I've had like sort of part of it like chipped away so that it doesn't rub together. But the pain is still there. The pain is still there. The only time I know it goes away is when I manage it. But I don't want to spoil it. I don't want to like what do you call it? Yeah, I don't want to spoil the magic. I'll let Beth talk about how you got into it. Introduce yourself and tell what you actually do, and then how you got into it.
Yeah,
Thanks.
thanks, Nasanka. And it's similar to you, really. So I have had pain at least 20 years, but probably longer than that, and a chronic back problem. And I thought it was all linked to a car accident. And yeah, it went through physio, osteopaths, all sorts of people. And they couldn't really diagnose what was wrong. They guessed at certain things, but nothing was really showing up on the scans. And none of the treatment really worked for that long. So I might have got a bit of relief for a bit, but it just kept coming back. And it was when I realized that I was battling with my pain and just trying to conquer it, that things kind of shifted for me, because it was like, you've got to go with your body and be kind to yourself and not think it's your fault, because often I think we think it's our fault. Oh, if only I did this differently, or if I hadn't picked that up, my back would have been okay. So often we blame ourselves, but yeah, that's not really helpful. So when we can work with our body and be a bit more empathetic towards it and listen to the signals it's sending us, then yeah, we change how we relate to pain, and it affects us quite differently then.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you say is the correlation or the relationship between pain and emotions?
Yeah, so again, I can talk from my personal experience. So as I said, I thought the pain originated when I had the car accident, but then I was thinking back, and I remember I used to have problems sleeping when I was about 18, and my back was really bad in the morning. So it was way before the accident. And again, lots of research, lots of like finding out more about pain. I realized that my back pain is probably from suppressing emotions and learning ways to contract my body. So when my nervous system was dysregulated, I was feeling overwhelmed, my body would just contract. And it became a pattern that I just got stuck in. So my muscles would be like, I'd feel quite relaxed, but my muscles are tense as though I'm needing to fight or flight, or even in a freeze kind of state. And they got stuck in that pattern. And so when we get stressed, obviously it feels worse, because that reinforces that contraction. And it just like how our whole body functions, how we move, like that fluid kind of, when there's no tension on our body, how we can just, move quite freely.
Really?
So yeah, when we're stressed, it makes it worse, but I think it's a long-term pattern that can kind of become a habitual way of holding our body. And a lot of the time we're not aware of it.
Yes, that is so true. For people who are not necessarily familiar with the term a dysregulated nervous
Yeah.
system, would you like to explain what is a nervous system, what it means to what does it mean to have a dysregulated nervous system? And then I'll ask a couple of more follow-up questions after that.
Yeah, I realise that might be a bit of a term that, like, I use it quite a lot, and it's not something many people not everyone's familiar with. So I think of, like, when we're functioning and we feel like everything's going really smoothly, we're kind of, everything's flowing, we're in a state that's fine, absolutely fine. There's no, like, our nervous system is what we'd call regulated, so it's like there's no threats, or because we're animals, and we're sensing, like, where the threats might be coming from, whether they're real or perceived threats. And then when we're not in that fine state, we'd go into a dysregulated state. So, and again, it's completely natural. So an animal, if they saw a risk, they would flee. So they'd run, or they would fight. So that's, again, a response our nervous system would be in. And sometimes the best approach is just to freeze. So if an animal was under attack, they play dead. So that those states, I know there's more. You'd probably talk about more states, but I would pick those as being dysregulated states. There's a few others that people talk about, fold and fawn as well. But
Yes, freeze and fawn. Yeah. Fawn is very relevant to narcissistic abuse, because fawn is people's pleasing state, like basically appeasing the oppressor to survive. And narcissistic abuse, we often tend to stay in that state, particularly children. I use the word particularly, I don't, it's just a term, but everybody who goes through narcissistic abuse tend to stay in the fawn response. They're pleasing the appeaser, oppressor. It's a survival technique. So I would say, like, don't label yourself as a people's pleaser. I don't think that will actually help you. It's just a normal nervous system response, so that you can actually survive in a state of terror, basically. And that contributes to pain, because you're one way or the other, what we are doing is to suppress what we're feeling, and to suppress how we're feeling in our emotions, and to suppress an energy flow that needs to either leave our system, or we need to burn, but we're not doing it. Instead, we're suppressing it, and therefore the body holds it, right?
Yeah, and I don't know, whether it would be useful to talk about ways that we can help shift state, because it's like it's a switch. We can get stuck in a certain state, but like you say, when we suppress that and don't allow the energy to kind of move, then it manifests somewhere physically, either physically or mentally.
Yeah.
So part of the work I do is give people really quick and easy ways to be able to shift out of a state. So often our body knows and our mind knows what to do. So we feel like screaming, or just like that real heated energy that we might have. And it's like, well, what do we do with that? You can't sit and meditate when you're feeling really angry. So something as simple as, like, just tapping your body. I guess you do this as well, Miss Ankle. And it just helps that energy move. And just like sometimes I'll go, like, somewhere away from everything and just have a really good shout, because it's that energy that just needs to move, or a shake as well. Do you suggest shaking?
I do, yeah. I just like to shake it all out,
like,
shake it all out, yeah.
I think of a sticky bit of chewing gum on my fingers, and you're just trying to flick it off. And just getting that energy out is, and rather than it feeling like it gets stuck and gets trapped. So those sorts of things can be really helpful. But there's, so my business is called Dial Down Your Pain, and I use an acronym called DIAL, which one of the aspects is learning more about nervous system, and noticing when you're getting slightly out of or I mean, I like what I'd say when you're, because often our baseline anxiety level, we're constantly in a little bit of a heightened state of watching for danger. But when you notice that, being able to shift state, so learning different ways to regulate your nervous system is one aspect. But I also work with 3 others. Is it okay to share those?
Go on, yeah.
So if I start with a D, so one is discovering about pain science, and it's like when we can understand what's happening in our body, we don't feel as scared by it, because, you know, if we've got a pain, it's reoccurring, it's chronic, nobody really knows why, then it's quite, it creates another level of anxiety. We're not sure what's going on. It gets worse when we're stressed. So actually understanding a little bit about pain signals and what's going on in our body can be really helpful. And sometimes when the pain's got an emotional link, it might not have, there may not be anything physically wrong, like if there's arthritis or, you know, you can name a cause, but when there's an emotional link, you can't find that physical reason for the pain, then understanding why we're experiencing pain can be really helpful. And there's so much research around understanding pain science and those signals in the body as well. So yeah, so that's the D. Any questions on that, or shall I go on to the I?
No, I mean, it's not a question, but it just kind of putting things into perspective, and you're absolutely spot on. When we recognize our body hurts and when we don't know what's going on, it can cause another stress. It's like, why is it? And we are constantly frustrated with our own body. Instead of sending it love and compassion, we're frustrated because the back hurts, so we're frustrated because we can't do something that we want to do, or we're frustrated because we can't sit up, you know. So we are constantly in that frustrated, angry kind of fighting with our own body state, and that doesn't help, because that triggers that anxiety that we kind of want to dial down in the first place, right?
Yeah, totally. And so much of the pain's linked to that higher stress levels. And I think so one of the things that I know Dana talks about befriending your nervous system. I talk about befriending the body. So rather than being in battle with our body and thinking, well, this doesn't work and we're just fighting it, it's like, yeah, listening to it and going, well, if that doesn't work, why am I making it do these things, like this shoulder? Why would I put it through this stuff that's making it more painful? And it's almost like when we don't listen to those signals, the body's got to shout louder at us and go, no, I'm going to give you even more pain, so you stop and listen to me. You know? So yeah, so that's the understanding a little bit about pain science. I've trained as a yoga therapist. I've been working as a yoga therapist for 13 years. So the I is to investigate what kind of movements are going to be helpful. And a lot of the time it's around like remapping movements. So, you know, when you do that tapping your head, rubbing your stomach thing, if we don't do this very often, there's the neural pathways of how to do that aren't present. So sometimes when we've had a shoulder injury, we lose those pathways that tell us how to move the shoulder freely, how to do the full range of movement. So it's around just building up that movement really gradually for people, where the body doesn't respond in a way that it's thinking, what are you doing? And overprotect. It responds in a way going, oh, I'd forgotten I could do this movement. And it can be really small and really subtle, but that can be really helpful, relieving tension around areas where there may have been an injury, or there's bracing patterns or holding patterns.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. It's about telling the brain, or training our brain to do things on gradually. Like I remember I talk about this frequently. So when I had severe depression and, physical pain, they're not very different from how things manifest. It's either the physical pain or the mental health, like you said. So the way that things manifested in my body was the back pain, the shoulder pain, severe headaches, like dizzy, that not migraine, but like severe tightened kind of pain. But then and severe depression. And when I had severe depression, I lost the ability to read and understand a simple email. Like I would be looking at an email that had less than 10 sentences and I'd be trying to decode it. It's like I can't. And then I had to use a post-it note to understand what was in it. And a task that literally takes 5 minutes usually takes an hour for me to do, because you're constantly trying to manage that. But what I then noticed over the course of time, when I was doing more and more and more, because it was a scary feeling. Brain was all I had, that's my thing. Academic knowledge, academic skills, that's all I had, that's all I knew. It was really, really scary. Same with our physical bodies as well. That's all we know, that's all we have. And it's a scary feeling to lose that skills and the flexibility. And then I had to, like, over time, practice little by little, little by little, little by little, one day at a time, half a paragraph at a time, 2 sentences at a time. And I'm not 100% sure if I am where I used to be, but a friend of mine pointed out, you're not doing things on an adrenaline rush anymore. You're doing things from a more calmer place now. So you might not be as fast as you used to be, but you might be more effective. And I think, that's a good perspective for me. So I think I completely agree with what you're saying. And you have to constantly keep doing things to create the neural pathways, right?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I was working with somebody this week and she said, we did some really subtle movements, and I was explaining this idea of remapping. She said, it's just like watching my grandchild learning to walk. And she was comparing the girl and the boy, and the boy was just like wanting to go really fast with it, and he could see his sister was walking. So he was just like, and he realized that actually he's got to work it out much slower. And she was saying I talk about our neural pathways a bit like being like if you were trying to cut through a bramble overgrown path, and when we don't use those pathways a lot, so when a child's learning to walk, those pathways haven't developed. And it's like cutting through the bramble, and if we don't do it that often, the brambles grow back. But if we keep going down that same path, it eventually can be like a superhighway, a motorway or something. The signals go so quickly. But yeah, it was really
analogy.
Yeah, and she said, when you're watching a child learn something new, you're witnessing those neural pathways developing. It's incredible. And how adaptable our pathways are. There's so much research with people that have had strokes and how the brain can get, like, part of it might be damaged, but then the neural pathways can, like, something that's not used that often can be replaced with something that's more useful. So it's nervous system is incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible how much our body can actually do and how disrespectful we are to our body. One way or the other, it's whether the food that we eat, whether the people we are surrounded by, because that's also damaging to our bodies, and to our energy. So definitely got to filter them out in our full life, the toxic people, and whether how much how much expectations we have of the body without actually giving it the rest that it needs.
And
Expect our bodies to operate 24/7.
And something I talk about is our broken relationship with rest. I think we've just, as a society, we don't know how to rest.
No.
We stop, but we're not resting. Our body's not it's, well, there's two things. We're not taking in nourishment when we do receive it, and then we're not able to properly rest. So
Yeah.
they're two huge things that I think.
Yeah, and it's just, I mean, looking at a more broader perspective, it's also the kind of society that we're living in at the moment, isn't it? Like, people have to do sometimes 2, 3 jobs to keep
Yeah.
things going, and
Mm.
as much as we need the rest, and if you don't do that, then you can't pay bills and whatnot. So I think it's a much more wider debate is needed
Uh,
in terms of how to look after people in a, living in a society.
yeah.
Anyway, what's the next one? Were
So,
you going to say something to that? Were you going to add
I
something
could
to
talk about rest for ages, but it doesn't have to be like sleeping. We can have nourishing activities that our body feels like, oh, we excuse me, just taking that time to just drop into a state of relaxation and rest, and it just being able to remind our body of how to switch off. Doesn't need to be
Yeah.
stopping doing everything. It's just a different way of being with it.
I actually have a question to you regarding rest. This is something that I often talk about. So people who've been narcissistically abused, and we've constantly lived in the fight or flight response or fawn response, suppressing everything.
Mm.
And our bodies are very, very tired and really, really exhausted. And
Mhm.
if I work with people who co-parent as well, which is a whole different,
Mm.
sort of ball game. And people are constantly really tired. And one thing that keeps coming up is I don't enjoy being a mom or dad anymore because I'm constantly tired dealing with these things. And physically speaking, they're really, really tired.
Mm. Mm.
And tiredness sometimes is a catch-22. You can't rest when you're too tired.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you have any suggestions that you can make to help the people who are extremely exhausted and
Mhm.
don't know cannot rest because the body is not allowing that?
Yeah. So again, it's like we get stuck in patterns, our muscles get stuck in patterns, our body can get stuck in a pattern of just being on the go. It's like we don't shut down the computer, it's just constantly on the go. So often when people are exhausted, they can't actually sleep. So and one thing that I suggest people try to do, and again, it might not feel that easy or accessible to begin with, is I'm going to use the analogy of a child again. So if you're holding a baby, and you can sense that their weight changes when they're about to fall asleep.
Yeah.
So you just get that heaviness of the body. And I think if we can find a way to remind our body to get into that heavy state. So I was talking to somebody the other day, and she was had quite a few different anxiety issues. And she said, I just feel on edge all the time. And you could see she was sitting in the chair and on edge. And I said, well, suggested that she sat in a different chair with the wall behind her, so she knew nothing could come from behind, and just like really sink down and let your body drop. So the same way as a baby's body might drop when we feel tired, and just like, so if we are able to stop and have a cup of tea, not being on edge and thinking, oh, I'm on the next thing, I'm on the next, and just really taking that time to feel the support of the chair. And even you can do like an embodied exercise where you imagine the chair is people that maybe are holding your back, that have got your back, and you just really lean into that and feel that support and dropping down. So it's simple exercise. And sometimes these things are a bit tricky to they're not going to work instantly. So I'd say have a go. If it's something that works and resonates and you feel a little sense of it, just keep working with that. But you might get a couple of seconds where you feel, oh yeah, but then just move on from that. Don't try and grasp after it, because that's the other thing. If we put too much effort in to try and get that feeling, And it's so really short little exercises can be good for that. The other thing that I think is a great way to rest our nervous system is taking in our environment. And just, again, it might be something you do, taking in anything of a particular colour.
Yes.
So you just scan the environment really slowly, looking at a particular colour, and then you stay with that maybe 10 seconds, but just long enough for you to feel like I'm still with it.
Yeah.
If you start getting pulled away into other thoughts, then you've stayed a bit too long. And just repeating that maybe a minute, different objects, different colours, different shapes. And it's a way our nervous system can drop down into that state of rest and not in the alert, scanning the environment for danger. So,
oh, thank you so much. Now that's when you were talking about that drop in the body kind of thing, I didn't know that it was helpful, but sometimes I actually feel that urge within the body to let go, because I find myself, so say for example I go to jacuzzi or something, I still find myself feeling tense and trying to hold the position. When I just like let go,
yeah,
I just let go, it's like, oh my God, that split second, the energy and the way I feel about the body actually changes.
yeah.
And then it's funny because in my head I was laughing, and then I try too hard to get that feeling again, and it never works.
Yeah, it doesn't. So it's like, so we can take that nourishment in that moment, but as soon as we start grasping for it, it's like it becomes out of reach. It's just like trying, I don't know, pick something. Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, how we can shift. And I do a practice, a traffic light practice. I drive and I notice when I'm driving, my shoulders can hunch up, or if I'm running a bit late or something, or the traffic's worse. Every time I stop at the traffic lights, my body naturally now just drops down into the chair, because it's something I've just done so often.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's very helpful. Because
yeah.
that's helpful.
Yeah. And at shoulders, it's like our jaw, our shoulders, our neck often are the places we really hold a lot of tension.
Yeah.
I could talk a lot about the diaphragm and how that's linked as well. That's a huge aspect when there's been stress or trauma, that our diaphragm can get stuck, and that, a big influence how our body communicates.
So what I'm really hearing is just as much as possible be present in this moment, and allow yourself to sort of soak up everything in your environment without overstimulating it. So if you've got the TV going on and there's the feeling outside and then the dog barking and there's children screaming, that's overstimulation. But if you can be in a quiet environment and soak up the environment without overstimulating yourself and be present, that's very helpful.
And something I use quite often is just to hold an object. So the environment might be really stimulating, but just taking hold of an object so your attention's really brought down. So this is like a half a nectarine shell. And it fascinates me. I love natural objects and just the texture of it, and taking your attention, particularly when we're in pain, we tend to focus really into the body. So taking our attention out to something different can be really helpful.
Okay.
So
brilliant. Yeah. So we talked about the D and I, and what's the A and L?
So the A is acceptance. So this one is it's that not blaming yourself. So it's I think probably one of the hardest parts for us to change, because a lot of the time we think, oh, it's my fault, I'm in pain, I've done something, or if I was different, if I didn't get as anxious or stressed, then I might not feel the pain. So it's that learning to accept that the pain's here, and so if it was your shoulder, it's kind of being compassionate towards that area. And they talk about, I work with acceptance and commitment therapy, and sometimes we, like when we're in pain, we can distract ourselves from the pain. If it's not, too bad, we can distract ourselves. But in acceptance and commitment therapy, they talk about something called diffusion, where it feels like a bomb's diffused, I suppose, like that grip that the pain might have on us just feels like it melts away. So there's tools that we can use to help create a bit more distance between you and the pain, so it doesn't feel like it's all consuming. And so it's not trying to get rid of it, but just like the whole idea of dialing down the pain is like the effect it has on you. That's what we've got control over. So when we learn to accept our pain, it can shift how we relate to it.
Yeah, it is with everything, isn't it? When we radically accept, and I talk a lot about radical acceptance when it comes to narcissistic abuse, until we get ourselves to that stage. And I mean, there's few steps before we get to radical acceptance, and I'm sure with the pain as well, there's the denial, the anger, and the frustration, and you keep fighting it, and then but when you sort of start becoming a little bit more aware of pain, that's why your framework is fantastic, because you start to sort of raising awareness of pain and how it affects. And and then when you learn about all these things, and we get to a stage where we radically accept, and everything becomes a lot easier from that place. Because when you accept, what, for somebody like, well, yeah, what, this is narcissistic abuse, this is abuse, I have been abused, I have been victimized by somebody, I am raising a child with this person. Yeah, I accept it. I accept I am in pain. I accept I've been hurt. I accept I've been lied to. I accept. And then suddenly, one of the fears we have is when we accept, it might feel worse. But actually, what it does is it just liberates you from strings and attachments to that feeling.
Yeah, and it feels so liberating. And I think that was like, I'd been searching for ways to manage my pain for years. And it was about 6 years ago, I think I came across acceptance and commitment therapy, and it was like a big penny dropping. And it isn't the easiest thing to accept, is it, at all? It does. It like you say, it takes work to be able to get to that place where you can see things as they are and think, well, how, like, it's empowering because you can see, well, this is the situation, how am I in this situation? And that's the thing that you can change, isn't it? It's like, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And what's the last one?
So the last one is, I mentioned it at the start, so it's learning about nervous system regulation. So it's like simple ways. The thing is, if we're completely depleted, like whatever we're trying to work on is a huge battle. So a big part of the work I do is helping people feel a bit more what I call resourced. So like they've got fuel in the tank, energy in the battery. And sometimes it's about figuring out, well, where are the things that are draining our energy, and can we put things in place, better boundaries around things that are draining us. But it's also like the example I gave about, I think I mentioned about taking in the good, the nourishment, and like really learning like ways to let that land in our system, because all the negative stuff sticks to us. And we're ruminating over that all the time, but we don't ruminate over positive experiences. And it's like, it's almost like you take a flavor of an ice cream and you just really taste that ice cream. When we feel something nourishing and really let it land in our system, it can just make that, it can shift our place from feeling exhausted to feeling more resourced.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. We're kind of coming to the end of our time. I know you and I both have a meeting at 10 o'clock. So
yeah.
we need to get to that one. And it's been wonderful. So couple of things, a couple of
Mhm.
questions before briefly.
Mhm.
If somebody is in so much pain and they have tried everything and they feel a bit hopeless about the pain, and what would you say to somebody like that?
So if they're curious to learn more, I think the first place would be to learn a bit more about pain science, because it takes the fear out of the pain. And on my website, I've got a few resources, little videos that are quite easy to follow. And it simplifies the science into a way that, you know, anybody could relate to and understand. And it also, I think it takes that fear of, what is it? You know, is it going to get worse? How am I going to manage if it gets worse? What if I can't work? All those things. The primary pain we might not be able to work around, but we can work around these secondary things like the fear. So yeah, checking out those resources would be something, and they're like 3 minutes long, so it doesn't take a lot of energy. And yeah, there's it would be reassuring, I think, for people.
So if somebody is working with our legally binding medical system, which is the Western medical system, we have a legal kind of obligation to work with them. And if somebody is actually heavily relying on them, but they're also not getting the results, I mean, we talked about it, but they don't want to let go of that, but at the same time, they want to try something different. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, so a lot of this will work alongside treatment that they're getting through Western medicine. And a lot of the time, you know, I work with people that might be on a waiting list for surgery, and it's, well, what could I try? You know, I might be waiting 2 years. What can I try in the meantime? So and I'm working with a couple of people with due for hip replacements in my pain class. It's an online class and an in-person class, and they're amazed at how much they can do and how empowering that feels. You know, they think, one lady, she comes in walking with 2 sticks, and she, you know, she's finding the classes so helpful. So I think it's finding that kind of movement that creates less tension in the body that would be really supportive for people that, in that situation.
Thank you. And always, always love your body and send compassion, send kindness, send love. Whenever I feel, I mean, you know, going through the perimenopausal stage, and, you know, there's always a scratch somewhere, there's always a pain somewhere, there's always something somewhere. And one of the first things that, you know, comes to my mind, in, like you said, frustration. But then I've got myself to a position where I just sit down and I pause and I just send some love and kindness, and it's immediately relaxing me to then carry on.
Yeah. And I think that's partly with the movement class. It's like realizing, well, my whole body isn't broken. There is movement that I can find. And it might be just the like really simple movement of the shoulder. And then it like it just helps everything free up. And it's like, oh yeah. And that appreciation of what your body can do, I think is huge. Yeah. So yeah, definitely. And another thing, when we're really in the midst of a flare up, it's that old adage, this too will pass. And just having faith in that you're not going to be in this situation all the time. It will pass.
It will pass, yes.
And
It will.
it's kind of riding that storm, isn't it? It's kind of knowing, I'll just batten down the hatches, get through this, and the sea will calm.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic news for anybody who is actually in pain. In pain. How can people get hold of you, find you?
So my website's dialdownyourpain.co.uk. It's got all the, if you tried any of the endings, I think it'll send you there. Okay. And there's resources there. I'm going to be putting more videos out, little resourcing exercises, articles to understand a little bit more about pain science. So I tend to send a newsletter out once a month, and there's always a new article or resource in that as well. So people can sign up on the website if they're interested.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your help. And if you want to get hold of me because you're in a situation where co-parenting with a narcissistic partner or toxic partner or ex-partner, then yeah, get hold of me. I've got the email there, nisanka@coachingwithnisanka.com, and the website is www.coachingwithnisanka.com. And thank you so much for listening and watching, and please share with anybody who you think is relevant. And yeah, get in touch if you need any help. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks a lot, Beth.
No problem. It's lovely talking to you.